Nearly 9 million people are eligible to vote in Ivory Coast's presidential election on Saturday. The campaign has been dominated by President Alassane Ouattara, who is seeking a fourth term in office. Key opponents have been excluded from running, and there are fears violence could mar these elections. VW's West Africa correspondent Azizat Olaoluwa reports from Abidjan.
Ivory Coast is facing a crucial test as the campaigns close. A cloud of uncertainty is hanging over the country's democracy. President Ouattara's bid for a fourth term is continuing to divide the nation, which has never seen a peaceful democratic handover of power. But the 83-year-old's supporters credit him with restoring the nation's economic fortunes, and after more than 14 years, he is determined to extend his grip.
It is with great emotion and joy that I stand before you for the official launch of my campaign for the presidential election of October 25th, 2025. Thank you for voting for me on October 25th, 2025.
Authorities have continued their clampdown on key opposition parties. They have been calling for daily protests since campaigning started earlier this month. Police fired tear gas and arrested hundreds of protesters at one of such gatherings in Abidjan 2 weeks ago. Massive protests had erupted in August after the Electoral Commission banned two top opposition figures, ex-President Laurent Gbagbo and former banker Tidjane Thiam, from running.
Why would anyone believe that they can serve 4 terms in Côte d'Ivoire? I refuse. The 3rd term he's currently finishing is even illegal. But not content with completing an illegal 3rd term, he wants to run for a 4th.
Only 4 candidates are standing in Ouattara's way. One of them is Simone Ehevert Gbagbo, former First Lady and the ex-wife of Laurent Gbagbo. She was convicted for her role in the deadly post-election violence of 2010 that spilled into the following year. Thousands were killed when her ex-husband refused to concede defeat. Once nicknamed the Iron Lady, she has made an extraordinary comeback to mainstream politics. A presidential pardon from Ouattara in 2018 offered her a clean slate. As campaigns close, the mood across the country is tense as many citizens are still suffering the effects of past election violence. Last week, authorities announced a 2-month ban on political rallies and demonstrations of parties with no presidential candidates, prompting many to question the government's respect for freedom of expression.
This is signaling the fact that the Ivorian democracy is still fragile and at risk here. It's really important for a democracy as the one in Côte d'Ivoire that is still trying to consolidate itself, that people trust the institutions playing a role in the electoral process.
Analysts say the fragmented opposition and the restrictions on the leading opposition figures may pave the way for an easy victory for President Ouattara. Many are even predicting he could win outright in the first round when the votes are tallied.
DW's West Africa correspondent Azizat Olaoluwa filed that report, and she joins me now to talk about Election Day in the Ivory Coast. Now, there are 9 million registered voters. Do you think Ivorians feel like they have the power to change the government on Saturday?
Unfortunately, from what we've seen so far, it seems that the people have accepted defeat, that they have no say in who becomes the next president of Ivory Coast, because some of them told us that the key opposition figures who have the chance to perhaps unseat the current president have been excluded from the polls. So they feel like going out tomorrow to vote might not, amount to anything for them. And they say that the result of tomorrow's election perhaps has been decided because President Alassane Ouattara doesn't have formidable opposition figure, to shake things up for him during the polls.
Now, do you think that any of the candidates running against the incumbent President Ouattara have a chance of winning?
Absolutely not. You know, from just what I said, you know, when the key opposition figures, former President Laurent Gbagbo and Tidjane Thiam got excluded, many believe that there is no other presidential candidate that is viable enough to pull enough numbers during the election. And they say that no one has the chance, not even former First Lady Simone Gbagbo, because the opposition party, the key opposition parties have refused to endorse any of the four main contenders in this election. So they seem not to have a chance tomorrow.
Now, one of the people you interviewed there in your report referred to Ivory Coast's fragile democracy. It sounds like one democracy that is at risk. Is that a widely held belief there?
Absolutely, because, you know, like people are saying that President Alassane Ouattara might win the election, but it's going to be a huge loss for democracy in the country. Former President Laurent Gbagbo described it as a civilian coup, electoral robbery, and that the people have been robbed of the power to choose who their next president is going to be. So people are going about their business quietly. Some of them look defeated. We went to Yukubon, which is a core, strong base of opposition parties, when we came to Abidjan 2 days ago, and the people there were not looking lively. President Ouattara had a campaign there, and very few people, you know, went out to support him at the campaign. So that tells you how the people are feeling. They feel like the result of this election has already been set, and it might even end in the first round. It might not go to a runoff.
Now, if people in Ivory Coast, voters in Ivory Coast, can't have a pure, uncompromised democracy, do you think they can at least rely on a peaceful election day?
Well, that's the hope of everyone, at least for the country to avoid the violent mistake of electoral past that they've had. You know, almost every election since 1995 was marred by post-election violence. So what the people are hoping for at least is let tomorrow go peacefully. They don't want any form of violence. And the authorities are quite key on that. They've deployed about 44,000 security officials across the country in order for them to keep the peace, as the authorities said, and to avoid any form of breakdown of law and order. And the authorities also announced a 2-month ban on any form of political rally or demonstration by parties that do not have presidential candidates. So they do not want to see anything go all right tomorrow. And more than 700 protesters were arrested in the past few weeks. Nearly 80 of them have been sentenced to jail for 3 years for, disturbing the peace and public order.
VW's West Africa correspondent Azizat Abiola Olaoluwa, thank you very much.